going to talk a little bit about what layers are. It's going to be pretty simple. We're just talking about the basic functionality of layers. We'll talk about masks next. We did talk about tools quite a bit, so we're not going to get into tools and selections and things like that. We'll talk simply layers this time. Let's start off simply. There's different kinds of layers. If you look over here on the right-hand side in the layers column, where I've got layers set up here, you'll see there's something called a background layer with a little padlock on it. The background layer, when you typically open an image first, it'll come in as a single layer, unless you're opening a PSD file which already has different layers in it, but that's a different story. Typical image, raw image, JPEG, it'll come in as a single layer and it'll be called background. It's locked because it's not really a layer, it's a background, and you can't move this background layer around. If I try to move this, for example, I can, I'll show you later, this thing will not move around. So it's because it's a background layer. I can unlock it by simply clicking the lock icon. Now I can move it if I wanted to. There's certain things you can't do with a background layer, but we'll leave it at that. There's a background layer to start with. Then there's layers above that background layer. Okay, so you can do different things with those things, and these are all pixel layers. Okay, there's pixels on each one of these layers, background and the other layers included, and some of these pixel layers have transparency on them. Okay, so if I take this background layer and turn it off, you now see these pixel layers above that with transparency. The transparency is the hash marks in here. So I can turn these layers off one at a time. The tree, I'll start on the top of the tree. We got the deer and the egret. Turn the deer off, and then the egret off. So as you turn the layers on and off using these little eyeball icons here to create the composite that you see in front of you here. And there's different things you can do with these layers. For example, ordering layers. There's an order to the layers right away. If I put my finger over, there's a little thumb there. If I put my cursor over the layer, I can select it by clicking on it. Now I've clicked the layer, I've got it selected. I can change the position of the egret now, although you won't see it because it's right on top. Let's take the deer. I can change the position of the deer to be in front of the trees rather than behind the trees by simply moving the deer up in front of the trees. Now the deer is in front of the tree, and now the deer is behind the tree. Okay, if I were to move him down. Okay, same thing with the egret. If I can move the egret around also, you won't see anything if I move them in front of the deer because they're not overlapping, right? But let's just say I do move the egret around, and I use the move tool up here. If I put the tool over the egret, nothing happens. But if I wanted to select the egret, I can do it here because it's selected here. But I can hold down the control key and select any area. If I hold down the control key, you see that little bar goes around there. I can select the deer that way. I can select the tree layer that way. These are selecting over, or I can select the egret. Okay, I can also select them obviously by clicking on one here. So once I've got a layer selected and I've got the bounding box around it, I can move it around using the move tool. Okay, and I can also resize it. Now the egret, as you can see, is behind the tree layer here. It's also behind the deer layer. Okay, I can bring the egret out in front of the deer and still behind the tree. So there's a lot of things I can do with layers by moving them around. I can have this egret flying in front of that branch, or in front of the tree if I wanted to. Okay. So the ordering of layers and the dragging around of layers is something that you can do. All right. Then visibility of layers I talked about by turning the lights on and off. These little eyeball things. You can also color layers. I mean, sometimes when you're doing layers and you want to designate different things, so you remember the layer. Sometimes you can simply color the layer. And let's see. So I can give the layers different colors like that. That's sometimes useful. For example, if you have a couple of layers and you want to do something like group the layers, let's say, So I can select several layers at the same time by holding down the control key. So I can have the tree and the deer. Say I want to have one group out of the tree and the deer, right? I can then do I hit right click on it and group the layers, or do Control G, and I can call this I'll just call it group 1, or I can call it whatever I'd like to do. Now I've got a group that works together. So I can group layers. Okay, if I have several groups, and if I've worked a lot on this picture, I may have 30 layers on this thing. So I may want to have color coding in terms of what I'm doing. So that's where the colors come in. So there you have it. You've got different layers. You can move them around. You can reorder them, put them in front of each other, and you can do things like opacity. So if I take this tree layer, for example, just the tree layer within this group, I can change the opacity of the layer to make it more or less opaque, and that'll work well when I'm doing things like skies and things like that to make them help blending. So I can change the opacity of the layer quite a bit. I can change the blend mode of the layer, but we'll talk about blend modes later. That's another topic. So there's different things you can do with layers. Now let's look a little bit about, as I'm looking at this panel, this layer panel here, some other things about the panel. There's something called layer effects here. Okay, so for example, if I'm on a particular layer like this one here, or let's just say, yeah, let's put myself on the egret. Okay, I can have different effects on this layer. For example, if I click effects, I can do bevel and emboss on it. Well, I don't know, I want to bevel an egret. I can do stroke, some of it. Let's just try, for example, and you'll see that as this menu comes up, they all come up. I can put a drop shadow on the egret. You can start to see the drop shadow here behind the egret here. I can change the distance of this drop shadow. Now that doesn't make sense. The egret's flying through a forest. That drop shadow doesn't look real. The opacity of the drop shadow and the spread of the drop shadow. So there's different things you can do with with the effects. That's one thing. Let's take the drop shadow off. I'm not sure what beveling and embossing an egret does, but I can create a bevel and emboss for an egret. The size of the bevel. So I can bevel this egret. This works really cool with text. Okay, soften the bevel a little bit. So I've got a beveled egret. So that's one of the things and you can do a lot of other things like inner shadows, color overlays, yeah, textures. Stroke is just putting a line around the egret here. I can create a stroke around the egret. That works good when you're getting into graphics and things like that. So I'm going to cancel out of that, forget all that. So that's what that effects is there. We'll talk about masks later. I can put on a particular, when I have a layer selected, I can, by clicking this, I will create a mask, and we'll talk about that in the next section. I can do adjustments on layers by either using that, or if I've got my adjustment panel here, I can use these things here. They're the same thing. These adjustments here are the same as these adjustments here. This creates a new group, if you will. So what I did before to create the group up here was Control G. I can do that by clicking on this. This adds a new layer. So for example, if I wanted to add a layer, and it'll add a layer above the one I've got selected. So say, for example, I want to add a layer above the deer level. And if I click this, it creates a blank layer, okay? So now I've created a totally blank layer here, which if I've selected, I can take something like my pen tool. I'll just take my pen tool here. It's and let's just so we could see it, we'll make it red, and just so we can see it here, we'll go up above. We'll make it a hard pen tool, a harder pen tool. Okay, so now I've got this pen tool. I'm on this layer here. I can make it a little bit bigger. I can draw on the pen tool. I can draw all over the place. Okay, you'll notice it's going behind the tree, but ahead of the deer, and it's non-destructive. I'm not drawing on the deer. I can turn the pen tool on and off. That's the transparent level. And I can do the same thing I did before by moving this thing backwards or forwards in the groupings to have a different effect on my pen tool. And then I can get rid of that layer. Now, to get rid of layers, you can either turn them off, obviously, deactivate them, or you can drag them into the garbage can. Okay? That's one way to do it. Let me see what else we got here. So layer creation, we've done that. We create the layer. We have all those icons there. The garbage can is self-explanatory. There are certain commands that we've talked about before. For example, if I want to copy a layer, for example, that deer layer, I can do things like layer new via copy, and the Command J command is there. So I could just go over here, for example, and hit Command J, and I've created a new deer layer. That one's right on top of the other deer layer. So I could move it around. I could resize it, make a fawn out of it. I could do things like edit, transform horizontally. I've got this little baby deer facing the other direction by its mommy. And now I've got a deer and a fawn together. Isn't that cute? Okay. And now once I've done all that, I might get to the very top of this stack of layers here and decide I want to do some overall adjustments on them or do something different, okay? So I can create what's called a stamped layer, and you have to be ambidextrous to do this. It's Shift, Option, Command E. What is a stamp layer? A stamp layer is simply, if I turn everything else below it off, it's simply a combined flattened layer. It's taken everything below and flattened it into one layer. So now I've essentially got all this and flattened it into one layer, okay? It's the same as everything below put together. And that's what that stamp layer is. And sometimes if you want to go off and finish off something, it's nice to create a stamp layer, okay? There's other things you can do now. You've got the stamp layer. You can do things, for example, once I've got the stamp layer, I can change the blend mode of this layer here. And then this is where blend modes come in, to different blend modes. And as I toggle over these blend modes, you'll see that what happens to the picture itself, it changes, right? So if I want a certain effect on this picture, for example, I want to make some of it darker. These are the darken areas here. Everything here does it darken. And it does, these are all mathematical, a lot of mathematical formulas here. Multiply is one I like. These tend to lighten. Okay, these work on the middle tones, gray. Okay, the gray middle tones, and we'll get into that later when we talk about dodging and burning. And these are the things that happen here. Okay, so let's just say I wanted to darken part of the picture. I could go to multiply, for example, create that layer, and then mask it off using some other techniques in masking. But that's what the different blend modes do. We'll go back to normal. Okay, let's see. And that's about it for layers. I mean, layers are not much more than that. You move them around, you use them that way. And then when we get into masking, you'll see a lot more that we can do once we've got these layers in place. Okay? Well, that's it for the tight topic on layer concepts. I hope you enjoyed it. See you for the next one.